Right, so if you're wondering whether you should really spend that crazy $1,800 or pounds or 1.7 lakh rupees on the Google Pixel Pro Fold, and other reviewers might have confused you a little bit with a lot of specifications and jargon, but not really helped you make a decision yet, then this is the review for you. But it's going to be a little different from what you might have expected. I've been using my Google Pixel Pro Fold for a couple of weeks now, and I've been trying to really understand if the bigger screen makes up for the compromises on camera and battery and actually justifies the higher price, especially when you compare to the much cheaper flagship Pixel 9 Pro. And to be totally honest, the answer really surprised me and completely was opposite to the view that I had before I bought this thing. Let's actually jump into the full review so you can understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. Let me start by giving you the summary, the TLDR matchup of this phone. The Google Pixel 9 Pro Fold was released in 2024 and it comes in two colors: porcelain, which is a pearly white, and obsidian, which is a slick black that I have right here. They start at about 1750 pounds, $1,800 or 1,70,000 rupees in India for the 256 gig version, and you'll need to add 100 pounds or $150 to get the 512 gig version, which is available in the UK and the US, and for some reason it isn't officially available in India at the time of making this video. Now remember, this is the most expensive phone that Google sells. In fact, it's almost $800 or pounds or 70,000 rupees more expensive than the top of the line Pixel 9 Pro, and that difference is enough to buy you a second phone. You can buy a Pixel 9 that costs $800. So you're effectively paying for two top-of-the-line latest generation phones. That's a huge investment, and if you're spending money worth two devices, you should get even better specs than just one, right? Not exactly. While the phone has the word Pro in it, on paper the Google Pixel 9 Pro Fold has a slightly downgraded outer display, which is a bit less bright and also not LTPO. This phone also has slightly worse battery life than the regular 9 Pro, given that it has a similar size battery but a much larger display to power with it. It has no fast wireless charging, no battery sharing with other devices like the 9 Pro, and the camera specs are not as good. The sensor is smaller, the megapixels are lower, but on the other hand, it does have many of the Pro features that the Pixel 9 regular doesn't have. Like, it has the 16 gigs of RAM, the 5x telephoto zoom lens and stuff, so it's more Pro than the regular. So it's the Google Pixel 9 kind of Pro Fold. But wait, these differences are on paper. Do they really matter and play out in real life use? Well, let's talk about it in detail. It's kind of hard to explain just how much I love the design aesthetic of the Pixel 9 Pro Fold without giving it to you to hold. The first thing that strikes you is how refined it is this year, with the brushed matte finish and the glass back, the fact that the two screens sit flush with one another, fully flat when folded. The fact that it's not symmetrical on the front is a bit of a shame. It's the only thing about the phone that really says this is still a work in progress design. It's otherwise kind of flawless. Other recent folding phones like the much-hailed Vivo X Fold 3 and even the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 6 don't have this asymmetry, though admittedly they have much sharper edges on the right side to match the hinge on the edges of the left. Now, as someone who's right-handed, I appreciate the comfort of the rounded edges, which also allows me to reach much further without needing to stretch my thumb when using it one-handed, which I do a lot. But for left-handed people, this will mean a much sharper edge and lesser reach. At the back, we have the ovular rectangle-shaped visor with the camera housing, which I think looks just fine. In fact, it gives the phone its own distinguishable identity and character versus the Pixel 9 Pro, which is important because it's hard to distinguish otherwise. Google have done such an incredible job of making this phone so thin that it's just 1/10 of an inch thicker when folded than the Pixel 9 Pro, and much thinner when unfolded. I mean, just look at how thin this is. As someone who uses two phones at all times, one iPhone and one Android phone, the one thing I miss a lot is having MagSafe at the back, and I've ordered the thin bond case for this phone so that I can use MagSafe accessories like my Moth wallet, a stand, and MagSafe charging at the back. Honestly, if it did have MagSafe, I might not have put a case on this at all and just slapped on a MagSafe wallet that also elevates it from my desk to protect the camera housing, and that would let me enjoy the premium thin form factor of this phone without thickening up that experience. Given the outer screen is basically the exact same screen size as the regular Pixel 9 or 9 Pro, and the phone is almost the same thickness, when using it on a daily basis, it can be easy to forget that you can actually unfold it. Which is a great thing, because unlike the Z Fold series, which makes you feel like the outside screen is way too compromised to use beyond quick text replies and stuff, this gives you a full-fledged experience of using a regular sized phone that you're used to. The other advantage of not unfolding it unless you want to is that battery life is better. If you unfold it less, only for the high productivity tasks from time to time, and that's because the bigger screen takes more battery and you don't want to use it unless you actually want to. While we are talking about the screen, let me discuss how this compares to the flagship Pixel 9 and 9 Pro. On the outside, you get a 6.3-inch OLED display that's super bright at 2700 nits, though not as bright as the 9 Pro, which gets 3000 nits. This is basically the exact same as the Pixel 9 regular screen. But given they call this a Pro and at this price point, you do wonder why they didn't give it the 9 Pro screen. But look, don't get too caught up in the specs. This is a gorgeous screen. Its brightness is great. Even in direct sunlight, the colors look great across the palette with vibrant RGBs and deep blacks, and the 120Hz refresh rate makes reading and scrolling socials a delight. On the inside, you get an even higher definition, incredible 8-inch display, which is much larger than the 7.6 inches you get on the Z Fold 6 and the 7.8 inches on the OnePlus Open. Only the new Vivo X Fold 3 has an inner 8-inch screen and compares with this. And it's really gorgeous when you take that kind of quality of a 2075 into 2052 LTPO 120Hz display and put it across 8 inches. It looks insane. And by the way, it's a huge improvement from last year, which makes the whole experience of using this phone so much better. A couple of small nits to pick though. The bezels are still pretty thick. I mean, your eyes will get used to them pretty soon and you'll get lost in the beautiful display, so I don't think it's a massive compromise or anything, but it somehow continues to remind you that this is still not a flagship phone. It's still in some ways work in progress, especially in a time when other manufacturers like Apple are trying to shave that last millimeter of the bezel off the phone as well, so you can just see it as one giant screen. This does feel like it's lacking a bit on the design. The other thing is the crease, and it's pretty much there. It's like more noticeable than phones like Vivo, and even the Huawei Mate triple folding phones that are blowing people's minds have a crease that's not as visible. So yes, you get immersed in the content pretty quickly and stop seeing it, but you can feel it with your fingers when using it, and the minute you go even 10-20 degrees off axis, you can immediately start to see it. So if you're watching a movie with your partner on a flight or showing someone a document or an article on the inner screen, they will see that content with a big crease in the middle. Now let's not forget that till a few years ago, the concept of a folding phone itself felt like magic. So I don't want to be one of those everything is amazing and yet I'm not happy guy, but I think that given this phone is more expensive than some of the other folding phones and those phones have a less noticeable crease, it's okay for me to nitpick a little as a tech reviewer. But should you put the crease in the negatives column when thinking about buying this phone and consider a Vivo X3 Fold Pro instead? No, I don't think you should, because in getting into these kind of details, we miss the big picture. Because what makes this phone worth buying is actually the experience of using it, which comes all down to the software. So let's talk about the software and the experience. I think this is one of the least covered elements in other reviews that I watched before I bought this phone, and I think that it's a big miss given just how much of a difference it makes to making this inner screen useful. I'm going to go into a lot of detail here to show you guys what you can really expect and experience when using this thing. But to make that easier to digest, I think there's primarily 3 kinds of things you might want to do with this inner screen. The first is productivity focused tasks like taking notes, multitasking, reviewing documents, spreadsheets, taking video calls, and so on. The second is gaming with the bigger screen. And the third is entertainment like watching media, scrolling your socials, and reading stuff. Let's talk about the first one first. Productivity is one of those big wins in the Google Pixel 9 Pro Fold, even over other folding phones because of its bigger screen. Multitasking works super well where you can just drop a second app to split the screen, you can change the size of each app to suit you, and you can save these apps in pairs that open together whenever you need them. For example, I tend to do video calls for work with my Notes app and Zoom open in parallel to see my talking points and also take fresh notes from the call. Similarly, I tend to watch YouTube videos whilst browsing the web and whilst taking notes sometimes when I do research for my YouTube videos. For these kinds of situations, it's incredibly useful to have the bigger screen. And in the past, I wasn't able to do either properly on my phone and I would try to do these things only at a laptop. But now I get a lot more of it done on the go than I would have expected. Now, other productivity tasks are equally delightful, especially if you've never used a folding phone before. It's going to be quite a surreal experience. I spend a lot of time reviewing PowerPoint and Excel materials, and you can just imagine how much better and easier that experience is going to be on this phone. For taking notes with apps like Evernote, you get the desktop-like experience with the ability to make a note full screen or click to move between notes rapidly. The only downside is that you can't have 3 apps open at a time like Samsung Z Fold and the OnePlus. Second, the gaming experience is pretty good, but only if the game is optimized for this form factor. Now, if you use the native aspect ratio of games that aren't optimized for this phone, it's going to leave a lot of space unutilized. So the Pixel has this experimental feature that stretches out the app to best fit the screen, which actually looks pretty good on many apps, even though there are still some minor UI issues to be sorted out, and some games just don't scale at all. The real thing to consider if you're a gamer is whether games will actually customize their app specifically for this phone, which I'm guessing will be hard in most cases because the user base for a folding phone, especially Google's, is still quite small, and Google itself is still experimenting with the size and the aspect ratio of their folding phones. In my brief testing, some games like Subway Surfer work great and look amazing on this giant screen, and some others completely bomb. Google has published a list of titles that has specifically been optimized for this phone, including Disney Speedstorm, Asphalt Unite, Dungeon Hunter 3, Modern Combat 5, NBA Infinite, or League of Legends Wild Rift. There are others like PUBG which run pretty well with Google's experimental aspect ratio stretch thing, and then there are some which are downright awful and miss half the content, and you would much rather play them in the non-stretch mode on the outer screen. Even then, combined with the fact that this Pixel actually doesn't heat up as much as some of the earlier ones, you have at worst the same gaming experience as your non-folding phone, and then based on how well that game is optimized or how well it stretches into the aspect ratio, it gets much better. That's not a bad deal. Compared to a non-folding phone, it's probably a plus. Then third, let's talk about entertainment. This is where the inner screen is more of a mixed bag in my opinion. Watching Netflix or YouTube videos in the full screen is better than using the outside screen, but honestly, given this is a square form factor, there's a lot of unutilized space on the sides. Now don't get me wrong, it looks great and it is bigger than the outside screen, unlike what you find on the smaller Samsung Z Fold 6 where watching on the inside or outside doesn't actually make that much of a difference. On this, it's definitely better to watch on the bigger screen, but it's not what you think it might be. For a great movie watching or content watching experience, you want something closer to the 16:9 aspect ratio of most media, and this is why I've been so excited about the triple folding phones like the Huawei Mate X-T that were recently released, or even the rumors that Samsung might launch a triple folding phone in 2025, because that can be unfolded once to get the productivity benefits of a squarish form factor, and then it can be unfolded one more time to get a full media and movie watching experience. And if you're that crazy guy in public, you can even flip it to make a really tall screen to scroll socials like Instagram, whilst even the person at the back of the bus can see it. Now let's get to the most hotly debated feature, the cameras. The cameras on this phone are admittedly not as good as the ones on the flagship Pixel 9 Pro, even though this phone costs so much more. There are basically two big differences. The first is the level of detail that each camera captures, or the megapixels, which are lower on the Fold versus the 9 Pro. And the second are the size of the sensors on the cameras, which are smaller on the Fold, letting in less light than the Pixel 9 Pro. In my opinion, the megapixel thing is less of a concern given that most phones shoot in 12 megs in default anyways, since people don't generally need to zoom in that much or print it out to put on the side of a building or something, and hence the higher megapixels beyond 12 just kind of take up valuable storage space on your phone. So unless you're a bit more of a pro photographer or enthusiast like me, you may not even remember to manually switch to the 50 megapixel mode on your 9 Pro when you travel. So it's not that big of a deal. What I'm basically saying is that this matters, and of course it should ideally be there on a phone that's called a Pro and costs more. But if you're an everyday user and takes shots of people and plants and scenery and stuff and posts it to their socials and shares with their friends and watches it on their TV, the 10 to 12 megapixels on this phone are more than enough to suffice. The camera sensor size difference is a bit more nuanced though, so let's get into that. Even though the hardware is different on the Fold, the main camera actually performs pretty similar to the 9 Pro in daylight conditions in my testing. And by the way, this is what you find across reviewers on the internet. Okay, but as the light gets lower, you can start to see a bit of the difference between the phones in the sharpness, the detail, the dynamic range, which is the ability for the phone to show both the bright and the dark parts of an image. All of that tends to suffer a little bit, but even then it's not all that easy to see unless you're really looking. Now this is because nowadays 80% of image processing is actually software and not hardware, and Google are amazing at producing incredibly well processed images, and even when given a camera with smaller sensors, they do a pretty decent job. But what gets harder for Google's software to make up for in the hardware is when you shoot video, and hence the video does look noticeably worse than the Pixel 9 Pro, especially especially if you use the ultra wide and telephoto lens. Now, the selfie cameras on this phone work just fine for video calls, but aren't as great as the Pixel 9 Pro, especially in low light. But remember that this phone has the unique advantage of being able to use the main camera to take a selfie. It's a bit unwieldy, but they take incredible selfies that are definitely better than the 9 Pro. So that's actually kind of a win. A couple of other minor quirks. The switching between lenses is still pretty crap across Pixel phones, unlike the iPhones and Samsung, but this is not unique to the Fold, so we can't really put it against it. Another weird quirk is that the selfies you take actually look nothing like the end product. I think Google quickly applies a lot of post-processing and then puts it straight into your photo gallery, which is fine, it's great, but you kind of have to look at your photo and imagine yourself to look better, which is probably a very emotionally healthy thing to do. You seem to have found a way to be woke again. Okay, final quirk. The placement of the internal selfie camera on the side makes things like face unlock and video calls a bit weird, as everything is kind of off center and you have to move your face around to match it. Okay, let's talk about the battery. When I first looked at the specs, I was like, how can it be that the Pixel 9 Pro, which has a 6.3-inch screen, has the same size battery as the Pixel 9 Pro Fold, which has an additional 8-inch screen? But as I use it, I now understand that it's probably hard to get a bigger battery in here because it would trade off the thickness of the phone, and without the phone being this thin, it would become too bulky and too unwieldy in your pocket. Second, like I said earlier, I think Google has figured out that if you give people a fully loaded phone on the outside and it's thin enough to forget that you have a folding phone, then people actually use only the outside screen for at least 50% of the time, or even much more. Many reviewers on the internet say they use the outside screen for more than 80% of the time. They only open the full tablet mode when they need to boost productivity and multitask or do a bit of research whilst watching a video or something. But that means that 50 to 80% of the time it's powering only the outside screen. Which is why in real life testing, the universal consensus across reviewers is that it lasts a full day, even if you push it. And it really does last a day in my experience. Well, of course, at this price point and given it's a Pro and all that, you'd expect it to run well into the second day and maybe even into a third. But look, an all-day battery is a good deal. It's not great, but it's good. If you can charge your phone at the end of every night, then you're going to be fine. So look, like I said in the beginning of this video, this phone is pretty amazing and seems to be worth it if you think of it as a tablet and a phone in one. So if you're someone who is already considering a tablet or might be willing to pay more to use that big inner screen to watch movies, multitask at work, read books and so on, I'd urge you to not just look at specs, but actually go into the store and spend some time with this thing. But if you're a pro gamer or a pro photographer, well, this may not be a top pick just yet, especially if this is the only phone you're going to use. But overall, I'm a really big fan of what Google have managed to put together this year, and at least I for one have made this my primary phone. So let me know what you guys thought of the video, of the phone, down in the comments, and without your feedback, I'm not going to get better at doing these reviews to make them more useful for you. So do leave some feedback below, and if you like the work I'm doing, do like the video as well, leave some love in the comments, subscribe to my channel so you get to see more, support a small content creator like me. See you soon on the next video.